seen the waterfront, that is basically talking about water neutrality, water harvesting and treatment, how you can also kind of utilize this space or like the water counting part for maybe a revenue generation scheme in future. So that is what will be the lookout. And also we are going to understand about the data requirements from an assurance viewpoint, because as we speak, there is also an assurance or maybe an assessment requirement as per the entire cascade flow that has been given by SEBI. So that's where like few companies would be doing their assurance or assessment for this financial year, and going forward, also more and more companies are going to get added onto this list. So we are going to talk about that. And finally, I have also added or included one more slide to kind of talk about different industries or different use cases so that every question can be answered, right? So typical questions related to, let's say, we are only a company who is not into manufacturing, it's a services company. In that case, what should be done? Or maybe like it is more of a trading firm. In that case, what you can do, right? All of these things are going to get answered. And feel free to like put down your comments or your like questions on the chat. We'll take that up at the end of the webinar. So we'll try to wrap up everything in the next 45 minutes and then kind of have around 10-15 minutes for the question and answer. Right. So with that, let's start with the understanding of BRSR, right? So I'll talk about the regulatory landscape that has changed, and we have seen frequent changes or updates that are happening from SEBI on this parameter, right? So if you look at this entire landscape or maybe like the time chart, you can see that in August of 2020, MCA released basically the BRSR guidelines, and it gave a couple of years for companies to get geared up for the BRSR reporting when it got mandatory for all the applicable companies from March of 2021, right? So that is the initiation of BRSR, I would say, for Indian listed companies from March 2021 onwards. In July 2023, SEBI released the new updated format of BRSR, which we call it as BRSR 2.0. That is where SEBI released a separate kind of like a framework, which is known as BRSR core, which is nothing new, but basically certain questions or certain data points, to be specific, total 9 questions out of the entire 161 questionnaire or 162 questionnaire as per the BRSR 3.0 update, which is covered under BRSR core. Then from April 2024 onwards, last year when SEBI released their, again, updated guideline, where it was needed for the top 150 listed companies to go for reasonable assurance. That was the mandate till last year. But now with the latest update that has come in on March 28th, in the circular, that they have mentioned that to kind of ease out the process and improve the ease of doing business parameter, they have given us some relaxation. So that's where the relaxation of, let's say, from assurance to kind of going for an assessment is applicable. And also there has been some relaxations on the value chain engagement and value chain disclosure as well. So we'll talk about this in the upcoming slides, but this is just to give you a entire regulatory landscape and the timelines that has happened in the last few years. Okay. So talking about BRSR, what I wanted to highlight to you, first of all, is that, see, there are globally multiple framework standards which are already applicable and which are already readily available for all the industries altogether, or maybe like any company of any certain size, right? So this is giving you a complete landscape of different reporting frameworks. On the top right corner, you can see the different frameworks there, like your GRI, SASB, TCFD, or integrated reporting framework, or all of these things. So these are different frameworks, right, which are agnostic to certain industry, agnostic to any country, and it can be globally applicable, where GRI has the most adoption globally. So that's where it becomes like kind of a globally accepted framework today. Similarly, there are regulations. So like EU taxonomy, SFDR, CSRD, IFRS, or even BRSR. These are regulations because this is more or less regulated by the primary market regulator of that particular country. So that's where we can see these regulations also evolving. We have seen multiple changes globally as well with this omnibus like package and even like this BRSR updates and all, right? Similarly, we have global principles and goals, like which are broad level goals. And again, like directly or indirectly, they do tag to the sustainability parameter of any company or organization. But at the same time, that is much more palatable to any country, city, or maybe a municipal corporation for measuring their progress on these parameters. So which are basically the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that we are aware of, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are there. Uh, Similarly, like climate action, UNGC principles, or principles of responsible investments, right? The PRI principles there. Again, this is not a sector agnostic thing. Certain things are very much specific to certain industry and certain sector. Certain are something that is very much global and open-ended, right? And finally, we have on the bottom left corner, these are ESG ratings and indices. Whatever is there, it is basically a global rating agency. So like your CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, or MSCI, Dow Jones, or your Sustainalytics or EcoVadis, all of these rating agencies or indices are something that are globally acceptable today. And those are the indices that also take into account of Indian companies. And we have seen a large adoption of like EcoVadis or maybe like MSCI or DJSI ratings or CDP ratings in the last few years from the Indian counterparts or Indian companies as well. And that is the reason we have kept it all together. So now from this slide, the major outcome is that we have to look at how things are panning out in this space of ESG and where BRSR falls, right? Talking about the BRSR 3.0 and BRSR core. So BRSR is, again, it is a regulatory framework which is mandated or applicable to Indian companies today. But if you look at the entire structure of BRSR, it is not a complete new structure or new framework. It is an inspiration of multiple frameworks altogether. We do have the NGRBC guidelines, which is again very much indigenous and specific to India. That is the main guideline or maybe like the main blueprint of BRSR. So the BRSR is spread across those 9 NGRBC principles that we all are aware of. Apart from this, BRSR is also inspired by the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it takes into account into that. Similarly, it also takes inspiration from UNGP as well as GRI principles. So you can say that BRSR, when you are reporting on BRSR framework, in that case, you are also covering few other frameworks altogether, like at least the 3 that you can see on the screen. And there are also indexing and mapping available for BRSR with these different frameworks. So in that case, you can be sure that, yeah, like it is at least covering few parts of these indicators, if not all, right? Now, talking about the general structure of BRSR, right? In BRSR, you can see the structure is divided into 3 primary sections, which is known as Section A, Section B, and Section C, right? So Section A is nothing but coverage of general indicators, which will cover your primary details of the company, like your SIN number, name of the entity, where is it listed, then again, like the working capital to your point of contact for any discrepancies on the data or any kind of such details like employee count, turnover, and all of these things, right? So that is basically covered in general description. And general description, each and every question is mandatory for each and every company who is reporting on BRSR framework, right? Similarly, Section B is nothing but management and regulatory disclosure, right? So management and process disclosure primarily covers the topics which are accounted to be what is material to the company, how companies are governing these parameters through like having structured policies, any kind of cascading system that they have, any kind of regular updates on the policies, what is the grievances mechanism there and all. So this section is primarily meant to understand or gauge any company's overview on the management principles or maybe the governing principles of these like all the frameworks or all the sustainability parameters that they are tracking. So this is again is completely mandatory for all the companies who are reporting on BRSR. So Section A and Section B don't give any room for eliminating any question or any kind eliminating any data points in that section. So every company who is reporting on BRSR has to complete this Section A and Section B data, right? Now, when we come to Section C, which is the principle-wise performance disclosure part, this entire section is divided into 9 subsections, which are tagged to the 9 NGRBC principles altogether. So you can see Principle 1, Principle 2, Principle 3 to Principle 9 as a structure under Section C. And in each and every principle, the questions are divided into two subtopics, which are leadership indicators or essential indicators, right? So here, what BRSR or SEBI or like the framework allows you to do is that for each and every principle, all the questions which are mapped under essential indicators have to be reported mandatorily by every company. So this becomes like kind of mandatory reporting if you want to align or say that it's a BRSR disclosure. But for leadership indicators, all the questions which are mapped under leadership indicators in each and every principle, those questions are voluntary for every company. They can choose to represent and answer those questions, and whatever data that they have, they can publish it over there. And that is a flexibility that is provided to each and every company as per BRSR. Now, certain questions which becomes part of your assurance through a BRSR core or maybe like a value chain disclosure, those questions becomes mandatory as and when there is an applicability for those particular questions and particular data points for that company, right? So this is the typical structure of BRSR. Now, coming to the question that we are discussing, that what is applicable and what is not, right? So what has happened in the latest revision of BRSR, the BRSR 3.0 framework that we are calling it. So if you see, it's not a big change. There is only one update in terms of the question that has been added in the BRSR framework. And again, like it is added to a leadership indicator of principle 6. So now you see a new question that asks you the data that how many green credits have been generated by the organization. So government has already made a provision that how you can like how an organization can produce or procure green credits, and that's a like well developed procedure altogether. So now in this BRSR 3.0 format, which is going to be applicable for companies who are going to report for FY 24-25 as well, basically whatever like this 31st March 2025, whenever you are going to publish your next BRSR report, for that particular report, you have to include this question in your leadership indicator. You have to put in the data if you do have that data. If you don't have the data, you can just like either choose to eliminate this question from leadership indicator, or maybe like you can also say that, yeah, we are in the process of collecting the data and then kind of report it in the following years, right? So there is one more sub question here, which is asking you about the uh, green credits, which is also being generated by the top 10 value chain partners of the company. Again, there is a correlation that it will only be applicable, or you will be able to get this data only when you do a value chain assessment and you get the data from the value chain partners. So there is a preamble to that. But like the data that is being asked is that how much green credits have been generated by the top 10 value chain partners as well. At the same time, how many of those green credits are procured by these value chain partners? So those two questions are also there. Like in the question, and this is what we have seen, that how things have panned out in the BRSR 3.0, right? Now, one more thing that has been updated in the latest circular, that is basically the assurance mandate, or maybe earlier it was known as reasonable assurance. Now the norms have relaxed. So now what SEBI is approving, or SEBI has recommended, is that either a company can go for an assurance. Again, the assurance can be a limited assurance or a reasonable assurance as per the applicability, or as per the company's choice. And again, this is not a mandatory requirement, it's more of a voluntary requirement there. But if you don't want to go for assurance, in that case, you certainly have to get this data being assessed by a third party. So for assessment, SEBI, in collaboration with the Industry Standards Forum, has released a guideline for assurance of or assessment of BRSR core data. So that is already there in public domain. You can definitely check that. And based on that assessment, you have to get the BRSR core of your particular organization assessed by a third party as per the standard framework, right? Now, from an applicability viewpoint, as it was already applicable for the top 150 companies from starting from FY 23-24, this has been changed in this financial year. So now all these companies who were earlier obliged to go for a reasonable assurance now can take this leeway and go for an assessment as well. They can downgrade their like assurance statement, or maybe assessment statement, that is applicable or that is mandated by SEBI. And this is the cascade format that is given by SEBI. So from FY 25-26, top 500 companies have to go for BRSR core disclosures, and at the same time get an assurance or assessment done on their BRSR core disclosures. Similarly, from next FY 26-27, the top 1,000 companies will be applicable, will be under this purview of entire BRSR core reporting as well as BRSR core assessment or assurance. So this is the latest update or changes that has happened. Now coming to the next part of it, which is covering the BRSR core requirement as well as the value chain requirement. So if you see earlier in the previous communication from SEBI, it was disclosed that every organization has to cover up to 75% of their upstream and downstream value chain partners in the value chain disclosures, right? That has been relaxed based on the communication and based on the feedback that they have got from multiple industry bodies. Now it stands for value chain disclosures are mandatory for partners who are comprising for more than 2% of the company's purchase or sales. So for example, what has happened is that, let's say your company spends 100 CR every year. In that case, if any company accounts to more than 2 CR of your sales, 2 CR of your purchases, right? Those entities needs to be assessed through this value chain monitoring or value chain mandatory disclosure. So that is what has to be the mandate. Now, there is also an option that voluntarily companies can take up to the 75% of their entire value chain partners. So if you choose to also include additional partners, even if it is not mandatory, in that case, you can go up to 75% of your value chain partners who accounts for your sales or purchases by revenue. So that has become kind of optional or non-mandatory today, right? Now, even for the value chain disclosures, assessments are applicable. So assessments are applicable on a voluntary basis from FY 26-27. So now, if you look at the cascade format for value chain assessment, so from FY 25-26, top 250 companies have to disclose this value chain disclosure. And for 2026, they don't need to either get a previous year data for the value chain partners. And secondly, they don't need to even go for a voluntary assessment or assurance on the data. But from FY 26-27, those top 250 companies can go for a voluntary assessment of the value chain disclosure that they are doing. And from 26-27, the top 500 companies would be top 500 companies would be required to disclose on the value chain disclosure, right? So correct. Sorry for the typo here. This is 550. It's actually 500 companies there. So from FY 26-27, there are top to 500 companies who have to go for value chain disclosure. Similarly, the cascade will go for FY 27-28, from where all the top 1,000 companies have to go for value chain disclosures altogether in that cascade format, right? So this is basically the updates that has happened and the relaxation and everything that has been given by SEBI. So this is what I wanted to cover. Now, coming to the next part of it, I believe for now, from a BRSR updates viewpoint, I have covered the things that are there. If you have any questions, any comments, or any doubts, feel free to note it down in the chat. I'll be happy to answer those questions and points later on in the question and answer session. I'll now take the time and permission to move towards the next section of the webinar, which is understanding the water footprint reporting for BRSR framework, right? So now, when we talk about the water reporting framework, it is essentially a single question or maybe like two questions that are there in BRSR Principle 6. One accounts for your water withdrawal, one would be for your water discharge, and combinedly, they also ask you the data for water consumption. So the attributes that are being asked in BRSR are going to be total water withdrawal, either in kiloliter or million liter, whatever is the unit that you are disclosing on. But it should be in liter. Similarly, the water discharge data, either is it with treatment or without treatment discharge that you are doing. That kind of granularity is being asked by SEBI, BRSR format. And third thing is that how and what is your total water consumption, right? Now, the water consumption data is basically a calculated field. It has to be calculated in the certain format for BRSR reporting, and I'll come to that calculations later on. Now, for your calculation of your data, right, there are typically two approaches that you can take off. One is basically measuring your entire flow of water from inlet to outlet. So for accounting, what will be the boundary and how should you account that? That is the question, right? I'll answer that just in 5-10 seconds. But there is a second approach that is also allowed in BRSR and that can be used universally for any company where you don't have a primary data today from your flow meters or maybe utility bills. That is, as per CGWA norms, you can take an assumption that per person per day, the water consumption would be 45 liters, right? So this is again uh, like nationwide accepted data that you can take an assumption that every person who is working from office, if you don't have the actual data from that office water consumption data, in that case, you can take an assumption that the number of people that you have in that particular office and the number of operational day in that office, multiply that with 45 so that you get the total consumption number of that particular office or location that you have, right? So this is basically the typical approach of data estimation. Now coming to the boundary definition of water accounting, because this becomes like the foundation stone for you to do any accounting and understand what is your operational boundary, what is your organizational boundary, and then kind of calculate that what will be considered as our water withdrawal, what will be considered as our water discharge, right? So if I have to give you a model or kind of a visualization here, think of it as a 3D model or a 3D box. Like I am taking an example that let's say there is an organization. We are talking about one particular manufacturing facility of any organization. Let's assume that it's a single company where they have only one manufacturing plant of, let's say, 100 square meter. It's a square that we are talking about. So for your operational boundary, right? First thing first is that you have to, first of all, identify or align your organizational boundary to this. So this is more or less a relation with the BRSR mandatory disclosure, that are you disclosing the data in your BRSR report only aligned to the standalone listed entity, or is it a consolidated report? If it is a standalone entity report, in that case, you need to only account for the assets or maybe offices, manufacturing plants, warehouses, branches, which are completely owned or operated by the company itself, right? If you are doing a consolidated reporting, in that case, you have to also account for all your subsidiaries, all your sister concerns, all the companies which are part of this reporting exercise, all of the entities combined together, the assets owned by them, all the facilities, all the like manufacturing plants, offices combined together should be reported in this organizational boundary of reporting, right? Second thing is that common approach that we have seen, and again, it is more or less aligned to the GHG protocol. You can either choose to take an equity share model when you are doing a consolidated approach or consolidated reporting. Similarly, you can also have a financial control method, or else the typical or maybe like the most used format is that operational control, right? So now financial share or equity share or financial control method basically talks about how much equity do you own in that company, and based on that, the accounting and the attribution should take place. For example, let's say if you have a sister concern and you own 10% of equity share in that case, if let's say that sister concern has a water consumption of 100 liters, you should be accounting that for this particular company, we have 10 liters, which is accounting to 10% of that consumption as per the equity share model. Similarly, on a financial control method, if you don't have any financial control of that sister concern, in that case, you don't need to report that. But if you have a financial control of that company, even if you don't own an equity share in that case, you have to attribute to the percentage of ownership in terms of your financial control, right? So this is how you can do a financial control method. In an operational control method, even if let's say you have a company where you don't have an equity share or you don't have a financial control, but at the same time you do operate the entire entity, facility, or maybe like a plant, and it is 100% under ownership of your operational control, in that case, you have to anyway include that into your like BRSR reporting or BRSR scope of water accounting or GH accounting as well. So try to align your water accounting similar to the accounting that you're doing for GHG emissions. In that case, it becomes very easy for you to understand what is there in our scope and what is not in our scope, right? Now, coming back to the visualization that we are talking about, when we talk about your operational boundary is nothing but a square, 3D square that we are talking about. A 3D square will cover your like visible boundary that you have on a 2D plane. But at the same time, when we talk about your water accounting, it is also accounting for the water table beneath the surface, right? So if you have a factory in this 100 square meter that we are talking about, the surface boundary is also being included into that. So that's where it becomes a 3D model, right? And that is where all of these accounting principles comes into place, right? Identify that sites which are within your organizational boundary. Those premises should be taken on. Like again, I have given all the guidance and things on the screen. I'm not going to read through. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a question over here. But like what I wanted to tell you is that in this 3D model that we are talking about, the aquifer below your office premise is also part of the entire water equation that we are talking about. So if you, let's say, withdraw water from the groundwater sources through a bore well or maybe an open well, in that case, you are consuming some water, withdrawing some water from the aquifer, right? Similar approach is that if you have a, let's say, rainwater harvesting system, in that case, you are recharging the water in the water table or water aquifer below or beneath the surface of your premise, right? So that is where the boundary is not only a 2D model, it's a 3D model where you have to also account for the ground beneath your like facilities boundary, right? Now, in this process, what we have seen is that typically the question that comes around is, shall I account the water that we use for gardening purpose as a discharge, or shall we account it as a part of our water consumption? Right? This is a typical question that I have seen. And again, I have come across this question multiple times. I have created a separate slide for it, so I'll definitely cover that. But if you have any other similar questions, feel free to put down in the chat. But I just wanted to view on this operational boundary part, right? Now, what is a better approach or like kind of a note that we wanted to put in here is that whatever accounting method, whatever process that you have, right, try to have this thing noted down as a footnote in your BRSR, that whatever boundary choices that you have created and how you have done it should be there in the footnote. There are two probable options and why you should report it. One thing is that you are clear that whatever you have done is getting communicated transparently to the larger public and even the regulatory agencies. And secondly, even if you don't have a system today to capture this data on a periodic basis, and there is a change in the management or the people have moved out of the company, in that case also you have the clarity that what has happened in the previous year and how we are going to appoint or do the accounting for the next year. So it is just to kind of have a similar picture every year on year and be consistent on the reporting part and being transparent on the reporting part. So that is the major outcome. Right. Now coming to the water withdrawal sources and accounting, right? If you look at the question that is there in Principle 6, which talks about the water withdrawal, in that you will see subsections or maybe a like a complete text box, which has a first column which talks about surface water, groundwater, third-party water, rainwater, and seawater, and others, right? So these are like very much self-explanatory, but I've just taken some few examples here just to kind of give you a view that what basically qualifies for surface water, groundwater, third-party water, and everything else. So like here also, typical question that we kind of get is that I have an office where we do procure, let's say, water bottles from, let's say, Bisleri or any other such drinking water companies. It comes in, let's say, 20-liter bottles that we kind of use, and then kind of it gets recycled through the same partner and all. So where shall we account that water, right, for drinking purposes? So if you have similar approaches, that water will be primarily tagged to third-party water because you are procuring it from some other agency. So all of these water that you have consumed through any party for drinking, that has to be accounted in third party. Similarly, like if let's say a paper mill is using a nearby river water for their processes, that will be taken as a surface water because whatever sources that you can see from your naked eyes, like rivers, lakes, reservoirs, and all of these things, which can be visible on through your naked eyes, those water sources are known as surface water. Now, if you withdraw from these sources, in that case, it will be taken as water withdrawal from surface water. If it is something that you are discharging to these water bodies, in that case, it will be considered as discharge to surface water. Similarly, groundwater is nothing but any water that you kind of extract through bore wells or open wells. Any industrial plant which has on-site bore well and all of these things are going to get covered in groundwater. Third party, I have already mentioned that Bisleri tanker waters will get accounted here. Similarly, if you get a water from your municipal corporation, right, or civic supply body, or maybe like a industrial body where your manufacturing plant is present, in that case, all of these water are going to be tagged to third party water, right? If you have a system in place where you do harvest the rainwater and collect and store it somewhere in a like underground tank and reuse that water in your process, in that case, you can add a section in your other section, say that it is a rainwater harvested water, and you can explain that how much water you have collected and then kind of also like used it. If it is 100% used, you can just add that. Secondly, if you operate in any location which is nearby to any sea or ocean, right? In that case, there might be a chance or there might be a possibility that the water that you are receiving from any third party is coming from desalination plant, or you can directly procure it from a desalination plant nearby, right? And again, like it is very typical situation. In that situation, you can categorize or tag that water as to be a seawater because you are taking it from ocean or sea sources and getting desalinated in a processing plant nearby, right? Anything other than that, which we have not covered, can be tagged in others. And you have to just specify that what exactly is the type of water source that you are talking about. Either it is a withdrawal source or a discharge source, right? Now, again, a note here is that metering at a source level is ideal because from a BRSR assurance or assessment viewpoint, you do need to have an actual data where you need to know the actual recording of source or withdrawal, and at the same time, the discharge point of your discharge, right? So those kind of things are there. Estimation techniques are definitely available there, but then at the same time, you have to eventually move towards an accurate accounting in the coming years. Right now, talking about the discharge point of it, right? So when we talk about water discharge, the similar concept applies. We have the same table which is talking about surface water, groundwater, and multiple other things. The only differentiation here is that is it a treated water or untreated water, or untreated discharge or treated discharge, right? So what is a treated discharge? So treated discharge is nothing but, let's say you have an STP in your premise, and if it is an STP discharge that you are putting in any of the withdrawal sources, in that case, it will come under a treated discharge only. Like here, you can either discharge it to surface waters like your rivers or maybe lakes in the nearby position, or maybe in a municipal drain or sewer. So that's where you have to mention that exactly where you are discharging, what is the like destination of discharge, and at the same time, what is the treatment that you have done to that, right? If it is an STP process that you are following or ETP process that you are following, then it will be a treated discharge. If you don't do any kind of treatment on the wastewater that you generate, in that case, it will be categorized as untreated discharge. Ideally, it is something that should be avoided. If you're disclosing that, then definitely look into the parameters or maybe like the consent to operate that you have for that particular plant and the CPCB norms that you are following, because it can be contradictory with the regulations and the requirements that you might have, right? Anything apart from this, wherever you use your water or your like gray water or any other water that is coming from your organization premise, recycle or reuse that, that is going to be considered in the, that will be kind of utilization of the water. You will not be taking that as a separate withdrawal or maybe a separate discharge for that matter, because you are anyway using that water or recycling or reusing that water, right? Now, coming to the specific point of gardening, I'm just touching upon here, is that gardening is often considered as not discharge because you are using this water for your gardening purposes. If you are not using this for gardening purposes, which is your recycled water, then you would have been using a fresh water sources for the same water requirement. And that is the reason we don't consider gardening as a discharge. It is primarily considered under consumption and recycle or reuse of the water, right? One thing where we have seen multiple reports, what we have seen is that many companies do have a ZLD commitment, and they do write down that, yeah, we are a ZLD certified or ZLD company, but at the same time, they show some kind of a discharge data there. So that doesn't go well. If you have a ZLD, you can't show a discharge number. Similarly, if you are mandated by CBCB norms to kind of show certain amount of discharge or like no discharge, in that case, you have to just make sure that all of the data that you're reporting in BRSR is aligning to the requirements of your CPCB norms. So there is just a point of caution that you have seen and observed in different reportings, right? Now coming to the point of water consumption. So water consumption is nothing. It's not a separate or a new data point. It is basically a balancing act. As per BRSR guideline or as per the reporting requirements also, water consumption is nothing but like your water withdrawal minus your water discharge. So this is the equation that you have to follow. Let's assume that if you have the entity that you are talking about, if you withdraw, let's say 100 liters of water every month, right? And you discharge, let's assume that somewhere around 50 liters of water, right? In that case, what happens? Your water withdrawal will be 100, your discharge is 50 liters, and your consumption will be 50 liters out of it, because 100 minus 50 is 50. That is what is going to be your consumption. If you kind of consider any recycling, any reusage for your like gardening purpose and everything, it's getting accounted there. If the concept here is that if water used for gardening is used, like if the recycled water is being used for that purpose, in that case, automatically your water withdrawal number is going down. And that is the reason it is not required to kind of map it under discharge or kind of any kind of additional withdrawal there. Now, for your BRSR core requirement, the primary requirement is that the water consumption has to be reported in kiloliters or any unit of liters. Similarly, for BRSR core, we have to also show some ratios, like intensity ratios, which can be tagged to either your revenue. So the mandatory requirements are you have to tag it per revenue and like turnover adjusted to PPP parameters. But at the same time, you can also tag it or maybe have an intensity calculation to the physical output that you have. So for a manufacturing plant, it can be per ton of production or per liter of production of material. Or for, let's say, a real estate company, it can be water consumption, so many liters per square feet of development that they have done. So every company based on the industry can select and choose the parameter that they want to report on, this optional parameter, right? Now, the case that we are talking about, the gardening and landscape case, right? As I already mentioned that this is a typical question that you have seen everywhere. I'll take two examples here to explain this thing. Let's assume the same use case that you are having. We are a single company which has a 100 square feet boundary. Within this boundary, we have, let's say, a green mandate, or maybe like there is one certain area where we do have our landscaping and gardening area where we use water, right? And this water is basically an STP treated water that we are using. In a way, we are using a recycled water, right? Now, the moment you account this water for your as a discharge, you are doing an over accounting, because you are not limited to this 2D model. As I mentioned earlier, it is a 3D model. You have to incorporate your water aquifer or the groundwater table also into this equation to know what is water accounting that you are doing. And I'll come to that part later, because when you kind of go for, let's say, any aspirational targets of being water neutral, water positive, and all of these things, that's where you have to take into account this entire aquifer or the water table beneath your premise, right? Now, here in this particular case that we are talking about, all the water that is used for gardening and landscaping purpose is to be accounted or eliminated, and it can't be calculated in your discharge. It can be assumed that it is lost to evaporation because you are using it for gardening and landscaping purpose, right? In a second case scenario, let's say you have a boundary of 100 square meter, but adjacent to your boundary, there is an open land where there is some kind of plantation happening, and you have made your water treated so well that it can be used for landscaping purpose, right? You are using the same landscaping water, or maybe like the STP treated water for landscaping or gardening of any premise which is outside your 100 square meter boundary, right? In that case, you will be using, or you will be calculating this as a discharge, because it is going out of your boundary that we are talking about, this 3D model. So even if you use this for landscaping purpose, but it is not in your operational boundary, it will be considered a discharge, and you can tag it to other discharge category, or maybe surface water or surface category as well, because you are not limited to your operational boundary or organization boundary that we have decided earlier. It is outside that boundary. So that is how we should be looking at these two different cases, right? Coming to one more thing that we have talked about, domestic water use. Like if, let's say, any company has work from home model, right, where you give flexibility for employees to kind of work from home and maybe have a hybrid working culture, or maybe you are using a shared premise, right, where you don't know the actual accounting because it's a central facilities team who manages all of these utilities for you, and you are just a tenant for certain seats or maybe certain floors there, right? In that case, what can be done? You can definitely use the assumption method here, but eventually what should be the roadmap or approach here is that you have to engage with the facilities management team of that particular location, kind of look into it, tell them that this is the kind of data that we want to get for. If they can facilitate, or you can facilitate putting up a meter at the inlet and outlet locations of your particular building or particular floor, in that case, that gives you the most accurate data. If not, in that case, what you can do as an attribution is that you can take the actual data from the facilities management team saying that for this, let's say there is a building, which is a 10-floor building. Out of that, you only occupy one floor, right? In that case, you can get the total data from the facilities management team that for this 10 floors combinedly, what has been the water withdrawal and discharge numbers for the entire 12 months. In that case, you can do an attribution that it can be either 1/10 if every floor is equivalent in terms of the size and the occupancy, or else you can do it as per the like occupancy rate in terms of the number of people, like whatever is the number of people that you have divided by the total number of people that are present in that building, or else it can be attributed to the square feet as well, because those kind of data points will be readily available in your lease document, or maybe like any kind of an official document that you have, right? So primary, try to get that data measured from your end. If not, these are the use cases that can be used to kind of calculate an accurate, near accurate data, I would say, right? Now, coming to the treatment part of it, right? Typically, when we talk about a water treatment, there are two major steps, which are either ETP and STP, which is commonly being used. So for ETP plants, it is primarily, you can see this type of plants in an industrial setup where you do have some kind of a chemical processing being done in your organization or maybe a nearby organization. Here, what we have seen in multiple cases is also that if you don't have an ETP plant in-house, there can be a central ETP processing unit in your local geography. Even like the industrial development corporations like GIDC, MIDC, all of these places, right? They do also have a central ETP, STP plant where they only are responsible to provide you filtered water, and they're also responsible for kind of treating that water. So you can get this data from your invoices altogether and also reach out to these concerned authorities for a much more accurate data. STP is something that you can see typically in a domestic or maybe like an office premise, where typically the gray water that is coming from toilets, kitchens, wash basin gets treated, and it can be reused for flushing purposes, it can be reused for gardening purposes and all of these things. So this is typically that understanding of water treatment and what kind of typical treatment that happens in water. Now, talking about the harvesting and water neutrality part. Now, if let's say you want to move beyond these compliances and you are already aware of all of the things that has happened in the past, and we talk about the accounting part, consumption part, and all of these things, and you are very much comfortable in terms of the data accuracy, data collection and all, and you have taken initiatives that are going to help you become much more stable in terms of the water related resource, So in that case, you can definitely deploy rainwater harvesting. This is basically very much common. We have seen, at least in Indian geography today. So you can have a rainwater harvesting system even for a small office location to kind of a larger unit and plant there. Other harvesting methods that you have seen is that recharge pits or percolation tanks that are very much commonly used for water aquifers. Check dams and sewers. This is again like very particular to certain industries, certain geographies, and even a stormwater harvesting process, right? So these are the 3, 4 different types of water harvesting methods that are commonly being used by any company, any organization out there. So you can also look into it, and if there is any need kind of delve deeper into this, we'll be happy to help you through the understanding of these processes and how we can go for water harvesting and neutrality. Now, when you talk about water neutrality, this is basically like a company's goal that we want to be water neutral. What essentially it means is that whatever water that we are consuming, right, we are recharging more than the consumption that we have. Like we talked about what is withdrawal and what is discharge in the last slide, right? If let's say you withdraw 100 liters of water, right, but your rainwater harvesting system already recharges somewhere around 150 liters every year, right? In that case, you are already a water positive, not even water neutral, you are water positive. If you just do 100 in that case, matching whatever you are consuming to the like water that you are harvesting through rainwater, in that case it will be a water neutral. If you do more, in that case it will be water positive, right? This is typically useful for companies and countries who are operating in a high risk zone for water. If you look at the WRI water risk atlas, more or less 90 to 95% of the entire country is considered to be a water risk zone, right? So in that case, you can think of it that way, that it is anyway a typical requirement for you, and you would need to kind of take care of that, right? Now, coming to the data management and reporting purposes, right? Like I've already spoken about this. And because like I do see that a very less time is left, I'm just talking about what are the things that you can do. Establish a data collection mechanism altogether, putting out meters, logbooks, or maybe like using utility bills or production data for calculating that. You do need to have a data collection mechanism in place, either through a digital platform or through an Excel sheet or any kind of mechanism that you are using right now. Typical recommendation that we give to any company is that do it monthly, if not weekly or any lesser frequency. At least do it monthly so that you do have a track of data. You do need to kind of have a well fleshed out roles and responsibilities for who is going to account for which data. Is it withdrawal? Is it discharge? Or which plant is it going to get the data from? You can also have a maker chicken model. Ideally, that is the suggested method, because in that case, you do also have an internal control for whatever data that you're disclosing, right? For your data assurance, as I mentioned, SEBI mandates that industry standard forum has come up with their own BRSR assurance or assessment standard. We can use that. But apart from this, ISA 3000, A1000AS, or ISO 14046, these are the different frameworks that can be used and recognized globally. You can use this and get it audited by any third-party auditor. The typical questions or the typical data points that any auditor will ask you will be source metering records, and even like the tanker invoices, municipal bills, or maybe like your bills that you get from the drinking water supplier, treatment logs for your ETP, STP, and the discharge data from the meter logs, or maybe CGW estimation sheets for your offices. So this is typically the data points that you would be needing to kind of share it with the auditor or external consultant for getting your data assessed or audited, right? Again, I am just skipping this for the interest of the time, that what typically should be an assurance provider. We'll be sharing this PPT anyway with you. You can definitely go through it. And this is basically my last slide, which is covering about 3 different cases altogether. Like we talk about, let's say an IT company who has an urban office. Here, the withdrawal primarily would be coming from municipal sources or tankers, because in an office premise, you will definitely get a piped connection, or if not, in that case, you will getting it from tankers. So consumption is primarily for office use. You can definitely use this estimation of 45 liters per day per person. This estimation is for consumption. Now, if you have to use this estimation for reporting on BRSR, you have to put down that third-party water withdrawal 45 liters. In your discharge, write down everything as 0, and automatically then your consumption reports to be 45 liters of your water consumption per person per day, right? You have to calculate obviously the number of days and number of person multiplication on that, but how to represent it, that is what I'm showing you, right? Next thing is that FMCG or manufacturing unit. In that case, what happens? If you have a borewell or rainwater harvesting, you will be using the data from those inlets and outlet metering points. And if you have a rainwater harvesting, it can be used for cooling towers, or just make sure that your treated water is complying to the CPCB norms. And in case of, let's say, hotel and resort, it will be also similar. You can have a borewell or a tanker. Consumption will be primarily in guest rooms and kitchen. And you will have an STP treated water that can be used for landscaping and cooling purpose. You can use that consumption, and even your RO reject water can be used for cleaning and gardening purpose. That can be used as a recycling of data, right? So I think I have covered the things that I wanted to cover. But yeah, like happy to take up questions. I do see multiple questions there. So yeah, happy to take up questions, a few questions, I would say. So let me take it one by one. Yeah, I will be sharing the PPT with you. So let's go initially. So, Mr. Priyal, if you are asking that what are green credits, how these companies can procure it, we'll definitely share the guidelines with you. That it's a publicly available document. Like Government of India has already made it like a public document, that how you can generate green credits and how you can report those data. So we'll definitely get you that inputs after the webinar is over. Vaibhav is asking that is assessment assurance mandatory or optional? So Vaibhav, I think I have answered this question earlier, that how it is applicable or mandatory for which companies. There is a cascade flow that has been given by SEBI. So you have to follow the same glide path for the assurance mandatory requirements, right? Yeah, so the question is that what is the difference between assessment and assurance? So if I have to give you a one-liner answer to that, assessment is nothing but we are assessing the process of our data collection and data reporting mechanism. What we essentially say is that in case, let's say, there are multiple inlet points, multiple outlet points, how we are recording those data, and is this recording of data aligned to the requirements of SEBI? As I mentioned right now, are you following the same guideline or not? That is what is getting covered in your assessment. In your assurance, you are also assuring the data points, right? So in a limited assurance, it will be typically a sample size data, typically ranges from 10% to 25% of the data that is getting assured. So the auditor will also check the individual data inputs that you have done, like corresponding to, let's say, your invoices, your meter readings and all. In a reasonable assurance parameter, it will be at least 75% to 100% of the data that is getting assured, not limited to just 25% or sample set of data. So that is a typical definition or difference between a reasonable or limited or maybe a assessment, right? Satesh is asking, is there a specific type of water meter? Because there are lots of issues. Some of the industries are using ordinary flow meter. Who is approving for water meter? So see, like there is no typical requirement in terms of the water meters. You can definitely go and choose any meter that suits you. The only requirement would be that the data from the meter has to be calibrated, and you have to have a valid calibration certificate for that meter whenever you are producing this data to the auditor. Right, the auditor will check that the meter is calibrated or not. If it is not calibrated, in that case, the data is false. Right, so you have to make sure that the data is like the meter is calibrated and you are recording that data either manually or digitally. If I have to give you a recommendation, you can go for a like digital meter. In that case, you get the data log on a real-time basis, or maybe like a digital platform. In that case, you eliminate any kind of manual intervention there. Right, so that is what I would recommend. Vaishali is asking, will you be covering your corporate office also? The answer is yes. Your operational boundary covers your corporate office. So in that case, any corporate office should be covered. That is a mandatory requirement in any way, right? Next thing is that most of the water consumption have been submitted to SPCB consent application forms. Shall the data is reported or other? I think Satish, we can discuss this later. I don't understand the question right now, and because of the time limit, I'm just skipping that question right now. I think like most of the question are recording of this webinar. We'll be definitely sharing the recording of this webinar. Sachin is asking 45 liters is more for one person. Sachin, if you have or if you contest this number, in that case, you can definitely go for your accurate reporting. It might be an overstatement. In that case, you need to collect the data on a meter level, like meter level data points, and then kind of come to a conclusion of your consumption. If not, then this is the only SEBI or like BRSR approved number that you can take up. And that's where you have to follow with this 45 liters only. Right? Ashutosh is asking, how are value chain disclosures done in practice? Does one just need to disclose consolidated data of value chains or independently data for each value chain partner? No, so Ashutosh, to answer your question, it has to be a consolidated data only that you are going to publish or report in your annual report. When you are collecting the data, in that case, it will be more of a value chain partner basis. But when you're reporting it, it will be a more of a consolidated data. You can choose to kind of disclose it as per the value chain partner individually as well. It is up to you, but then like the reporting has to be more on a consolidated level, and you have to rightly mention that out of the total vendors that have been assessed, what is the percentage of the value chain partners that you have assessed? Is it 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever is the actual number? And here the catch is that if let's say you have 100 vendors, out of that you have only assessed 2 vendors, but that those 2 vendors are accounting to 20% of your spend, right? So in that case, you have to report 20%, not that 2%, because it is not asking you about the number of like percentage in terms of the numbers of vendors. It is asking you about the percentage as per the value of spend or value of purchase, right? I think more or less this is what we discussed upon. Sorry, like we are already over the time. We'll definitely try to like have more sessions on this. And if there are any question, any doubts, you can definitely reach out to. I'm just putting out my email ID. So you can definitely reach out to us and send us your questions and like any kind of doubts. We'll be happy to clarify those things, and we'll definitely share the recording of this presentation. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for your valuable time, and I hope we were able to address your questions and doubts in this entire BRSR workshop series, and we'll be seeing multiple other sessions coming up. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.